I appreciate your attendance tonight. You had us a little scared because at about 11:45, there's only about 6 or 7 of us here, and that's pretty unusual. Normally, we're all here, or most of us are here earlier than that. But I'm glad that you did filter in time. And we will review a little bit of chapter 13, so you can be opening your Bible there to Revelation 13. There are notes that are back there on the credenza for chapter 14, 2 pages. If you did not get those, you may want to slip back and grab those notes if you want them. Is there anybody who did not get those notes? Anybody at all? Okay. TJ went to get some, I think. Did he? Okay. Your wife didn't get any, and Sadie didn't get any. So, in chapter 13, we have 2 beasts. We have a beast that comes up out of the sea in verses 1 through 10. That beast is described, and then starting verse 11, we have a beast that comes up from the earth. Now, I spoke with somebody who was wondering if the beast is Nero based on verse 14. So let's look at verse 14. It says, "And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life." Now, as I explained, the one who had the wound of the sword, the Machaira is the word used here, was Nero. Nero died by putting a Machaira to his throat and slitting his throat. And he was resurrected in the personage of Domitian. Domitian ruled the throne 3 emperors after Nero. And if you just look just at this one verse, it looks like Nero is the beast. But if you back up to the description of the first beast, we find in verse 2, it says, "And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like a bear, his mouth was like a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast." Now, the one who had a fatal wound, and a fatal wound is one you die from, but who was resurrected in a sense, as I've already explained, that's Nero, who had the fatal wound. He was healed. He came back in the person of Domitian. But it says he's only one of the 7 heads. He's not the entire beast. And so there are 7 heads, and each of the heads stands for one of the emperors of Rome, starting with Augustus. And there's, I'll probably mess this up, Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, and Nero. Is that 5? I think that's 5. And then next was Vespasian. Well, there were 3 little usurper kings, but they didn't hold the throne very long, but they did have a crown. And this beast has how many heads? 7 heads, but how many crowns? 10 crowns. So there were 3 who had the crown for a little while, but really Vespasian was the next king to really hold the throne for any length of time, and he reigned for 10 years. And then after him was Titus. So that's the 7 heads. Now when we get to chapter 17, it'll explain again the 7 heads, but then it's going to say, and there is an 8th one. Well, after Titus was Domitian. Titus and Domitian were both the sons of Vespasian. So that's the beast of the sea that comes up out of the sea. And what is the sea, class? Sea of people, right? That's what it means, is the sea of people. So out of the sea of people rises up the civil persecuting ability of the Roman Empire. That's, in totality, that's really what the beast is. And it's the whole Roman Empire, not just the city of Rome, because the 7 churches of Asia Minor are not in Rome, are they? but they're still suffering persecution from the Roman Empire. And so that's the beast that they are facing at the 7 churches of Asia Minor. The second beast, starting in verse 11, that comes up from the earth is emperor worship itself. The fact that they had to bow to an emperor. If they didn't, they couldn't belong to the trade guild, which means they couldn't buy or sell in their respective communities, and they would starve to death. So, those who would bow and worship Rome, or the emperors would receive the mark of the beast. And this beast has a number attached to his mark, and that number is 666. And we put our heads together last week, didn't we? We really thought this through because it takes so much wisdom to be able to figure this out. 6 is man's number, 3 is deity. So 666 is man trying to deify himself. I know, that's so disappointing, Such a simple explanation, but that's it. I'm sorry, there's no more. That's all it means. It does say that it takes wisdom to figure this out. It doesn't say you have to be a genius to figure it out. It just takes a little wisdom. And so applying the principles of apocalyptic literature, that's what 666 means. That's the mark of the beast. Now there's another mark mentioned in Revelation besides the mark of the beast, and that is the mark of the Lamb. And that's what we're going to get into in chapter 14. So give me 3 readers. Who wants to be our first reader tonight? Hands up. Quick. Chase will be first. Come on down, TJ. Who's my second reader? Pat. And then my third. Okay, Lee will be our third. All right. Appreciate that. I only do 3 because that's all I can remember. So we'll do more. All right. Well, let's start reading. Chase is going to lead us in verses 1 through verse 5.
Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. And the voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. These are the ones who have not been defiled with women, for they have kept themselves chaste. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb, and no lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless.
All right. Can't believe you messed up chaste. I mean, chaste, yeah. Goodness. Yeah. All right. So we have a lamb. The lamb we've already encountered. We know who that is. We heard about the lamb at the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5. And so the lamb is Jesus. In chapter 5, verse 6 talks about him. The 144,000, we learned about them as well, right? In chapter 7. In chapter 7, we learned that the 144,000 is 12, which is the totality of God's people on earth, times 12, the totality of God's people on earth, times 10, times 10, times 10. 10 is the number for human completeness. And when you multiply it 3 times, that means completeness to the nth degree. A redundant phrase, intentionally redundant. It's supposed to be that way. And what it means is all of God's children. Nobody gets left out. That's when you see 144,000, that's God's people times God's people to the nth degree. That's literally what that number means. It's not a literal number. You don't count to 144,000. Okay, that's it. Yeah, sorry, you didn't make it. You're not one of the 144,000. No, that's not what it is. It's not a literal number. It's the totality of God's people on earth in chapter 7. But now, The 144,000, when we get to chapter 14, are standing with the Lamb, Jesus. And where was the Lamb at in chapter 5? He was not on earth, was he? He was in the throne room of heaven. And he's on Mount Zion. Now, in your notes, I have, about 8 passages there, starting with 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6 through 10, through Hebrews 12, 22 through 23. I would really like for you to read those on your own time. Right? If you will read those will help you to understand Mount Zion. To the Old Covenant kingdom, to the Jews, Mount Zion was a physical place. It was the hill in Jerusalem on which the temple sat. But over the years, the meaning of it evolved to mean the place where God is. They believed that God was at that temple. He was in the Holy of Holies. If you ask a Jew, where's God? Well, that's where he's at. But to us, is he in Jerusalem? No. He's on the throne room of heaven. So that's what Mount Zion is. Especially that one in Hebrews chapter 12. I think that'll make it really clear to you. Zion, to us under the new covenant, means the throne of God. And so here's the 144,000. Somewhere between chapter 7 and chapter 14, they wound up in heaven. They are in heaven, at least in the vision that John is seeing. And so they are there. It has to work that way. If you had them at the Mount Zion in Jerusalem, which is how some interpret this verse erroneously, that means the Lamb would have to be in Mount Zion. And if the Lamb, Jesus, is on earth, his priesthood is forfeit. Does it dawn on you the severity of that statement? If his priesthood is forfeit, he can't be our high priest. He can't intercede for our sins. We're all lost if his foot touches the earth. Our hope of salvation is gone. And that's the whole problem with this 1,000-year reign of Christ. He's going to come back around. No. Look at Hebrews chapter 8. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Hebrews chapter 8. And let's start in the first verse, Hebrews 8 and verse 1. Now, the main point in what has been said is this. We have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. And if you haven't figured it out, that's Jesus. He is our high priest. He's the one who intercedes to God for us. Verse 2, a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle, which the Lord pitched, not man. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, so it is necessary that this high priest also have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the law. There you go. And so Jesus is not coming back to the earth to reign. And in this passage, he's not describing Jesus on earth. He's describing Jesus in the throne room. Now, Jesus is coming to the earth in judgment on the Roman Empire. That doesn't mean they would physically see him. That just means he's coming in judgment. Jesus has come in judgment many times throughout history. He came in judgment against Egypt. He came in judgment against Babylon. He came in judgment against Jerusalem. And he's coming in judgment against the Romans. Okay? And he will come again in judgment, the final time. But his feet will not touch the earth. We will rise to meet with him. Everybody understand that? Okay. So, verse 2, I'm back in Revelation 14. The voice from heaven, it sounds like many waters. It's like the sound of harpist. It doesn't say it is harpist. It says it's got that melodious strumming sound that you hear if you've heard somebody play the harp beautifully. And they sang a new song. They sang a new song. We have a song in our hymnals called the New Song. Larry's shaking his head. He knows, yeah. We know that song. The new song. It thrills my heart to hear the song above. We mortals sing below. One of the lines says, I hope to hear throughout unnumbered days the song earth cannot hear. They sing in heaven a new song of Moses and the Lamb. If you are one of the 144,000, you know the song. Isn't that nice? You know the song. But the ones who have the mark of the beast, they don't know the song. The ones who have the mark of the Lamb, they know the song. The ones who have the mark of the beast, they're excluded. They don't get to know the song. Jesus just turned the tables because in the world that those Christians were living in, they were the ones excluded. They were the ones who couldn't belong to the trade guild, right? And the ones who had the mark of the beast, they got to belong. So Jesus just flips that around, says, you don't know the song, do you? Shame on you. They have the mark of the Lamb on them. In verse 1, it says that it is the Father's name written on their foreheads. So stamped right there on the foreheads, it says Yahweh. It says Jehovah right there. Literally? No. No. What does that mean? That means you can tell. That person has God on their mind. I can tell. It's obvious. They have the mark of the Lamb on them. Not a physical mark, but in the way they think and the way they behave. The mark's on their hands too, right? That's the mark of the Lamb. You either have the mark of the Lamb or you have the mark of the beast. There's no in between. One or the other. So if today you don't have the mark of the Lamb, you have the mark of the beast. In other words, if you don't belong to God today, you belong to Satan. 1 John says you're either a child of God or you are a child of the devil. That's what the Bible says. Jesus says, he who is not with me, or he who does not gather with me, scatters. In Matthew 25, he separates the sheep and the goats. You're either a sheep or a goat. In Matthew 7, there's a broad road and a narrow road. Need I go on? I mean, throughout the whole Bible, we see this idea. You're either on one side or the other. There is no neutral ground because this is not a game, folks. This is a war. And you're either on one side or you're on the other. So get on the right side. If you're not on the right side, make sure you get on the right side. We want the mark of the Lamb. This new song is sung before the four living creatures and the elders. Where do we encounter four living creatures and the elders? In the throne room, back in chapter 4. The four living creatures. How many elders are there? Okay. That might be on a test someday, so you might want to remember that one. 24. What's 24 mean, class? 12 plus 12. 12 is the number for God's people on earth, or at least a representation. That's what the 24 elders, they're a representation of God's people on earth, even though they're in heaven. So the 144,000, they know the song. They have been purchased from the earth. It says at the end of verse 3. Verse 4, these are the ones who have not been defiled by women. Now, it's not a sin to touch a woman, but men and women, when they get together, they do sinful things at times. And so that's what this verse is talking about. Someone who has cleansed themselves, purified themselves, they are chaste. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Now there's a beautiful, beautiful thought. How do you spot a child of God? Oh, they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Is this where the Lamb's going? That's where I'm going. That's decided. If my master goes there, that's where I'm going. If my master's not going to go there, I'm not going there. You see how this applies? Okay? That's how we should live every day. I'm going to do what the Lamb does. If the Lamb does it, I'm following the Lamb. If he won't go there, I'm not going there. But if he will, that's where I will be. I'll be where the Lamb is. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They've been purchased from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And so we've been bought at a price. We're purchased. No lie was found on their lips. Well, does that mean Christians don't lie? That means Christians shouldn't lie, that's for sure. Okay? But when we do sin, we are blessed to have our sins washed by the blood of Christ. But we are called to live blamelessly, to live in a righteous life in the sight of God. All right, that is the first 5 verses. TJ, Pat's going to be the next reader right there. We're going to read verses 6 through verse 8, please, Pat. There, now it is.
All right. And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth, and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. And he said with a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heaven and the earth, and sea and springs of water. And another angel, a second one, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality.
Okay. A lot of angels in the book of Revelation, and in chapters 8 through 11, we read about 7 angels who would step forward and blow their 7 trumpets, and each one announcing a part of a partial judgment. 1/3 of this, 1/2 of that, 1/10 of this, partial judgment. This angel is, first of all, who is he speaking to in verse 6? Who's his message for? Those who live on earth. So this angel is bringing a message to earth. We're going to find out it's an evangelistic message. It's for every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. And here's the message. Fear God and give him glory. Now, that is what sinners need to do. They need to learn to fear God and give him glory. That's the evangelistic message. Why? Because the hour of his judgment is coming. We need to worship him who made heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs and the waters. And so we need to learn how to worship God. Sinner, fear God and give him glory and worship him. That's what you're supposed to do. The other angel, here comes another angel. And he says, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Babylon. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about Babylon. Look at chapter 16 and verse 19. It says, the great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. Now, you may remember, class, a week or 2 ago, I talked about the great city. What is the great city? That's Rome, all right? Anytime you see the great city, that's talking about Rome. Here, he calls it Babylon. And so this verse is describing Rome, and he calls Rome Babylon. Look at chapter 17. And actually, for 11 verses, he is talking about Babylon. Let's look at verse 5. It says, For on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. Let's see here. All of that, verses 1 through 11, is talking about Babylon. And when we get to that passage, we're going to find out that this harlot represents Rome, and Rome is called Babylon the Great. maybe chapter 18. Now, this is even longer. We have a repeat of what we just read in verse 2. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. Verse 4, he says to the believers, Come out of her, my people. Don't participate in her sins or receive her plagues. In verse 10, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And so we're going to see Babylon several times. And when we see this, it is referring to Rome, just like we encountered already in chapter 11, verse 8, where Rome was referred to as Sodom and Egypt. And so review a little bit here. Why was Rome compared with Sodom? Immorality, decadence, all right? It was immoral like Sodom, but why Egypt? The slavery, the oppression of God's people. So now, why would Rome be compared to Babylon? The slavery of God's people. Same thing, all right? So just several different ways of describing Rome. Why doesn't he just say Rome? Well, because it's apocalyptic literature. And these comparisons are of value because they help us to understand how God sees Rome. God sees Rome like another Egypt. God sees Rome like another Babylon. He sees it like another Sodom. And we know what happened to them. So guess what's going to happen to Rome? So that's why he doesn't just say Rome. He's making a comparison here. But he says, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. At the time that this was written, when John penned these words, had Rome fallen? No, not yet. So how could this angel be saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great? How can you say that a city is fallen when it hasn't fallen yet? Well, look at Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4 and verse 17. As it is written, A father of many nations have I made you in the presence of him whom he believed, even God, who gives life to the dead and calls into being that which does not exist. How can the angel say, Rome has fallen when it hasn't fallen yet? Because if God says Rome is judged, it doesn't matter if it's happened yet. It's going to happen. It's like, that heavyweight fight where really the knockout blow was delivered back in the third round. The guy's still standing. He hasn't fallen to the canvas yet. Well, that's Rome. Still staggering around a little bit because we've already had the trumpets, and Rome's been knocked around a little bit. It hasn't fallen completely, but it's going to. And that's what that means. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. And the immorality is connected to the emperor worship. Let's read on here. I got a couple more things I want to cover before we run out of time. Chapter 14, and I think Lee is our next reader here. Verse 9 through let's do verse 13 if we could, Lee.
Then the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hands, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them.
Okay. So yet another angel steps forward. This is the third one in this chapter that's mentioned. And he says, if anyone worships the beast, receives that mark on the forehead or on the hand, in other words, the way they think and the things they do, you can tell who belongs to the beast, who has the mark of the beast. Those are going to suffer. They're going to drink the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured full strength in the cup of his anger. What's coming up? I'm so excited. 7 bowls are going to be poured out. And those 7 bowls are the wrath of God. That is the judgment against the Roman Empire. And so here we're getting a glimpse, this cup full of the fierce anger of God. They're going to be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the angels, the holy ones. And so this punishment is going to take place. Smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. Now, if that were true, does the smoke of Rome and their demise, does that still go up today? Yes, it does. Yes, it still does. In a spiritual sense, here we are talking about it 2,000 years later. The smoke of Rome's demise, they're standing against the people of God, and their utter destruction because of that still speaks today. It's still rising up, still reminding us that God loves his people and protects his people, and you better not stand against them. That's the point. And so it rises up. Those who worship the beast in his image and receive the mark of the name, they're going to suffer. And this is the perseverance, or Lee's translation says the patience of the saints. The saints need to persevere. They need to be patient through the hardship. Why? Why should we be patient? You ever thought about that? Why do we have to keep enduring this stuff? Well, let me tell you, a little hardship in this world is easier to endure than an eternity of torment in hell. That's the reason. Okay? So just put them side by side and see which one you would rather have. A little hardship here on this earth or an eternity of torment in hell. Weigh that out. See what you think. I think it's worth it. I think a little bit of hardship here on this earth is well worth it. The Christians were suffering in the first century because they would not receive the mark of the beast. They would not give in to emperor worship. They would not go along with the Roman ways. And because of that, they were suffering hardship here on the earth. But look at the reward. Look at the trade-off. That's what Jesus is pointing out to them. This is the perseverance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. I heard the voice from saying, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. See what he's saying? Man, it's a blessing. We get to die in the Lord. That's great. Go ahead. Kill me. I'm going to heaven. That's fine. He's saying that needs to be the attitude of the saints. Yes, says the Spirit, so that they may rest from their labors and their deeds follow with them. And so there's the reward of those who are faithful to God. Verse 14, before I get there though, I want to point out something. You see verse 6, where we started reading, down through verse 13, and this is in your notes. It's fascinating that verse 6 through verse 13, those 8 verses, I think I counted that right. Those 8 verses cover the remainder of the book of Revelation. And if you look, I have this in your notes. Verses 6 and 7 are parallel with chapter 15 and 16, where the outpouring of the 7 bowls, which is what we're going to start talking about next week. verse 8 is parallel with verses 17 and 18, the beast and the fall of Babylon. Verses 9 through 12 parallels chapter 19 and 20 of the book of Revelation, the judgment of Satan and of the wicked. And what we just read in verse 13, that lines up with chapters 21 and 22, which is where it talks about the reward of the faithful service. And so there is an outline of what's to come in the rest of the book of Revelation. That'll preach, by the way. That's a good little outline there. So, all right. Now let's do verse 14. I do need a new reader here. Who will read that? Buddy, would you read that for us? So we're going to start in verse 14. Let's do 14 through... Let's go ahead and knock it out, buddy, through verse 20.
Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung a sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven. He too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has the authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vines of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung a sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,800 stadia.
All right. This one who comes on the cloud, he comes on a white cloud. White is purity. This is a white cloud. He who's sitting on it. We're trying to figure out who this is. Well, he's like a son of man. Oh, that's a strong hint, isn't it? How did Jesus frequently refer to himself? Son of man. Son of man does this. Son of man does that. So he's like a son of man. He has a golden Stephanos, the crown on his head, the crown of victory, and he has the sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel out of the temple. Ooh, this one's from the temple. He cries out with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put in your sickle. It's time to harvest. The earth is ripe. Now, remember when I was mentioning how the white horse, when the first seal was broken, that horse represented Christ? And I told you some disagree with that because they say Christ, if that's Christ being called forth, he's being called forth by an angel, by a subordinate, and he wouldn't do that. Well, if they had a problem with it back then, they'll have a problem with it here too, I'm sure. But I'll repeat again, Christ would not have any issue with receiving instruction from an angel, a subordinate, especially when that angel is getting that instruction from where? From the Heavenly Father, all right? So there's no reason not to believe that this one who is harvesting on the earth is Christ. And it is the sign, the picture of him harvesting and gathering up his elect. That's the harvest that he's doing. Because there's another harvester that's going to come in behind him in verse 18. And this angel has the power over fire, and he came out of the altar. Now the altar back in chapter 6 and verse 10, that is where the saints are underneath the altar, the souls of those who have been slain, and where are they crying out? How long, Lord, faithful and true, until you avenge our blood? That's the altar that he is coming from. And so he comes from this altar, and he calls with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, Put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe. Now this is a second gathering. The first gathering was the harvest of the believers. Now we have these other grapes, and Don, these are bad grapes here. These are not good grapes. These are the bad grapes. And so he's harvesting up these grapes. What happens to them? Well, the angel swings a sickle, he gathers them up, and they throw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. The winepress is trodden down. The idea that the trodding, you may remember when the two witnesses in chapter 11, it talks about those who were trodding the holy city, not the great city, the holy city. The great city is Rome. What's the holy city? Jerusalem. But Jerusalem stands for the people of God, right? So they were trampling. So now these who were doing the trampling, now they're being trampled on. They're being trodden. They're outside the city. Where was Jesus crucified? Outside the city. Why? For shame. They hung him and the other two thieves next to him, where they would be seen as people entered the city for shame. And now these are being cast outside the city, and the blood rises up to a horse's bridle. What would that be, Chase? 4 or 5 feet? Yeah, that's quite a bit, all right? And runs for however many stadia it said in Buddy's Bible. Mine says 200 miles. That's a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood. What does all this mean? It means the judgment is coming. That's what all this is saying. It's a-coming, folks, and you better be ready. You didn't listen to the seals. You didn't listen to the trumpets. The bowls are coming, and you got to get ready. I'm going to stop right there. Appreciate your attention.